Plants vs. Zombies 3 Evolved has now been in early access for over a month in Ireland and the Philippines, and the biggest complaint I've seen the community have alongside myself was that it was too difficult to unlock new plants to use, and the player is just stuck using the most basic plants throughout the entire game, which of course is the exact opposite of what Evolved is supposed to be. So on my quest of trying to 100% the game, I took it upon myself to spend real money unlocking every plant and using it in-game so that you wouldn't have to. And quickly, before I begin, I want to mention that this video is not sponsored by PopCap or EA in any way, and this did come straight out of my pocket, so all of my opinions I share about the game are actually my own. Oh, and it would mean a lot to me if you subscribe, because this did hurt my pockets a little bit. But okay, enough begging and stalling, let's start the journey. The game starts off the same way the previous beta did, basically explaining that a meteorite has fallen to Earth, having weird properties that allow for the combining of plants called evolutions, and bringing upon mutations within Zomboss's zombie army that make it much stronger. Like for example, this big zombie snail named the escargot. And our goal is to use our arsenal of plants to take down the zombies in 100 different levels. And completing the tutorial actually gave us enough seeds for bok choy, which is basically a smaller version of bok choy, as well as enough seeds for spikeweed and potato mine, leading us into the first issue of the adventure story mode. And after every 10 levels, you can actually watch a cutscene, sort of showing how the game is progressing, with at first Dave trying to lick the meteorite that seems to put him into an indefinite state of sleepiness. We are also introduced to the different power-ups in the game, and they all allow you to do different things, but I'm not gonna lie, I never really end up using them, so they don't really matter that much. And now it's time to enter the official level 1 of the story mode. And since I played the beta, I was already familiar with a lot of the fusions, but I did notice that by this time in the beta, we actually had a lot more options to fuse into. Like if you remember, we were already given different fusions, like the golden Yukon, which is the combination of the sunflower and the potato mine, alongside the solar pea, which is basically a combination of the sunflower and the pea shooter. But this time we weren't given those guys. So for now, I was making do with the more basic ones like the repeater, coleslaw, and peanut, which you'll see the peanut in the early game was definitely one of my favorites because it's basically just a tanky pea shooter. Level 2, I started bringing in the bok choy, making use of him. And as far as damage goes, the bok choy lineage is definitely one of the better ones in this game, so you'll see it getting used a lot. Oh, and I'll definitely be mentioning all the different aspects of the game as well, like this one where it's a daily chart of your scores and you basically get rewards for playing daily, and the rewards you get are dependent on the high scores you get within the levels. And it's honestly very easy to get the top reward for this. There are also the potted plants, which you'll see me use here and there, but also when I start spending money, you'll see that I don't really actually need this area. And jumping into level 4, I was still basically using the same strategy of the twin sunflowers, cabbage pults, pea shooters, bok choys, and peanuts. I'd even get some gatling peas here and there, which is actually one of the better things that they did with the early access compared to the beta, and it was making the levels much longer so you can actually make use of the tier 3 fusions. Because if you remember in that first video I made for the early access, a lot of the levels are so short that the tier 3 fusions didn't really matter at all. And in this game, you can actually make use of them, but that only applies for a lot of the earlier levels of the game, and you'll see what I mean by that a little later on. Because for now, after beating level 5, we actually got enough seed packets from the game to unlock the iceberg lettuce, which is also a pretty important plant later on. This was also the time that I started looking through all the different plants, like this giant sun shroom, which was newer in this early access, but most of the plants were the same as I remembered. I did notice that this game had a lot less plants than the beta, which I don't exactly know the reasons for, but I'm just assuming that the devs will be releasing them later on, because a lot of the plants that got removed don't really make sense in my mind to remove. But either way, I did notice some new zombies, like the batter zombie. He definitely seemed like a cool zombie who could knock back your projectiles every 4th shot. There were also some zombies like the chicken wrangler that weren't in the beta but now are in the early access, so that was definitely cool to see as well. Oh, and if you're interested in joining my community, it's named the Palace. This is of course a feature that was already in the beta. One of my favorite things also returned, which was the Neighborville Watch, and this is basically you working together with your community to meet different requirements for different rewards. So kind of like the town hall from Garden Warfare 2. And even though I don't use the Zen Garden too much, I should mention how it works. And basically, if you look at the top left, you'll see these hearts which you can get after a certain amount of time, and using them you can plant one plant in the pot, and after that plant grows up, you can either choose to evolve it with another one or harvest it, giving you seed packets. And the bigger the evolution is, the more seed packets you get. So it's one of the scarce ways you can get seed packets in the game as of now. And you might notice there's an icon on top of the cabbage pults, and that's what you need to grow them, and you get those guys through playing different types of minigames, which the first minigame I played was the sorting one, and after a while I was able to sort everything into the correct cup, obtaining a silver trophy for it and 3 bug sprays, which allowed me to start growing my cabbage pults for seeds. And after no change to my strategy, I eventually made it past level 10, unlocking the second cutscene where we're introduced to Patrice, who is Dave's niece, and she starts conversing playing with Mo, who is actually our lawnmower in this game, and if at any point while in a match you look to the back left, you'll see that Mo is always there, and he is actually the only lawnmower that we get within each level. And we see Mo sort of freaking out here because Dave isn't waking up. After explaining the situation to Patrice, they make their way over to the lawn where Dave is, and Mo shows her the power of the meteorite, combining a pea shooter with the walnut and creating the peanut. And this really excited Patrice because it meant that she'd win the science fair, after rescuing Uncle Dave, of course. And this cutscene ends when we see a couple of zombies and an imp approaching the lawn, so Mo and Patrice dash over to take them down. Here I was basically using the same strategy of the peanuts, but just adding the spikeweed in front of them. And I completely forgot to mention this, but if you look in the bottom left, you'll notice that there's no character there. And if you remember from the first beta, you could customize your own character, and they kind of just stood there looking all cursed. So in the early access, the devs thankfully removed that feature. But I'm gonna stop stalling because these early levels went by kind of just in the same manner every single time. And after beating level 15, I got enough seeds to unlock Zaptail, who is the plant that I probably use the most in the game. And Zaptail is the baby version of Lightning Reed that can only shoot in its own lane, unlike Lightning Reed. And I'm not gonna lie to y'all, that statement that I just said is a lie. And what I mean by that, you will also see when I start using Lightning Reed. But I'm warning you now, you're not gonna like what you see, so just be prepared. And for retention purposes of this video, alongside my sanity, I'm skipping straight to level 20, because after defeating level 20 was when I realized that the game isn't gonna be giving me any tier 3 plants that I want to use throughout this entire adventure, and they're only gonna give me the most basic ones. And of course, I didn't want that to happen because this video would just end up being the same exact thing as the first one I made on the beta, and I want to try all the cool plants like the Mega Sunshroom, the Chainsaw Grass, which one of them can attack in all 5 lanes, even the Spear Grass, which is very similar to Pokra from PvZ2. So I'd made my way over to the gem shop, which if you look at the bottom, you'll see that there's those purple plant packets, and using those you can actually get any plant you want. But of course, the problem is that you need gems to get those guys. And there's actually another problem with buying the gems themselves. One, they're just super expensive, and buying the $100 pack, I would actually need to spend upwards of $800, because doing the math, I realized that I'd need 80,000 gems in total to get every single plant unlocked. And the second problem, since I wasn't from Ireland or the Philippines, I actually couldn't buy the gems, and I would just get this message instead, which at this point I almost threw this video idea in the garbage can. But then I saw this one thing. If you look to the right of the $100 gem pack, you'll see that it says earn gems, and clicking on it, it takes you to an offer page. And long story short, I'm basically using the offer page, which I can actually go into different games, spending money in those games, and then getting the gems in this game. And I hope that makes sense. But even if it doesn't, it's not really a big deal. And it's more so just important to show you how many gems I got and how much money was spent to get them. With the first offer, I got 7,000 gems, and I spent $20 getting it. The second offer gave me nearly 11,000 gems, and it cost $50. The third offer gave me 18,000 gems, and it cost $100, which you might have actually noticed is 7,000 more gems than if you use your money in-game. I don't really know how that works, but doing the offers, I did realize that it was actually more worth it to go through the offer wall than actually just spending money in-game. The fourth offer was $10, and it got me 2,400 gems. And now if you look in the top right, you'll see that I have 45,000 gems, which adding up all the gems that I just showed you doesn't actually add up, because I kind of forgot to record footage of one of the offers that I got, which had given me about 6,000 gems, and it cost me $30. And next up, I found some pretty good offers, because this one gave me 18,000 gems. It was like the previous $100 offer, but this one only cost $50. And the same thing with this one, which also cost $50. And that brought the total to $310, which for now was all the money that I spent. Because if you look at the top right, you'll see that I already had over 80,000 gems. So the next stop was just spam buying the ultimate wild seed packs, unlocking the Chucknut, Sunflower Seed, Golden Yukon, Lychee, Lightning Reed, Winter Greens, Wrangle Kelp, Jumbrella Leaf, Solar Pea, Pine Needler, Electric Pea Shooter, Sling Pea, Bonk Choy, Nippy Cabbage, Speargrass, Sawgrass, nearly completing off all of the tier 2 plants, with the exception of some like the Puff Shroom. But moving on to the tier 3 plants for now, we unlocked Mash Destruction, Juggernaut, Endurian, Numbing Cabbage, Punk Shocker, 3-Nut, Mango Kelp, Sun Tower, Beet Choy, Blockwood, Freezar Salad, Chainsaw Grass, and this nearly completed off all the tier 3s. And I say nearly because we still had to unlock the tier 1 Sunshroom and tier 3 Lime Bomb, which were newer to the early access compared to the beta, and this allowed me to unlock the tier 2 Giant Sunshroom, the tier 2 Greminade, and the tier 2 Puff Shroom. And I'm not gonna lie, Puff Shroom being a tier 2 plant was definitely a pretty weird choice for the game. By the way, moving on to the tier 3s again, we unlocked the Dangerine, the Mega Sunshroom, and lastly the Explo OJ. And unlocking all these guys, I got left with only 2,500 gems. And these were all now going to be used buying coins and experience points in order to level up all the plants that we just unlocked to level 4. And it's specifically level 4 because after reaching that level, you actually have to evolve the plants, which costs different materials that are a little bit more difficult to get. But now it was time to test out these plants, with us first looking at this cutscene where we see Patrice slap Dave because she was really trying to prove if he was really asleep. So then Mo and Patrice end up coming up with an idea where they needed zap tails to zap him and try to wake him up that way. Meaning it was time to jump into level 21, where we first get to test out some new plants. The first of which, if you look towards the back, was the lightning raid. Remember when I said that weird little dialogue about the lightning raid? Well, if you look at the one in the bottom middle lane, you'll see right there that it's actually not shooting the zombies and it's in adjacent lanes. And that's for some reason one of the changes PopCap made to the lightning raid. It can now only shoot in its own lane. And of course, the same thing goes for the zap tail and the punk shocker as well. The lightning, of course, can still chain onto different zombies in adjacent lanes, but I feel like that 3-tile range that I had previously was what made me like it. And I'm definitely not a fan of this change. So I hope at some point that we get the original lightning raid back. But either way, moving on, you can see up front that we had now used the spear grass as well, which has a 3-tile range, but if it's hitting a zombie in the farthest tile from it, it actually deals more damage. And I think that's because the spiky part of the spear grass is hitting the zombie when it's the farthest away. Oh, and like Pokra, it pierces zombies as well. But that aside, this level, I used 4 new other plants as well, 2 of which you've already seen, and they're pretty simple, which are the Sun Tower and the Punk Shocker in the back. The Punk Shocker is a better lightning raid. The Sun Tower, I can actually explain in a different level because I end up using the Sun Tower in basically every level from now on. But the 2 other new plants that I use are the Lychee that you can see up front, and it's basically like a small Endurian from PvZ2. It deals damage to the zombies attacking it, and it's very tanky. And on the topic of the Lychee, the last new plant that I used was the Endurian itself. And of course, we kind of already know what it does. Basically a tankier and stronger version of Lychee. Level 22, the first new plant that I use is the Sling Pea, which is the combination of a pea shooter and a cabbage pole. And I planted it way far back because I thought that it could shoot the zombies that are way far up front, kind of similar to how it is in PvZ2. But as you can see, that was not the case. And instead, it can only shoot in a 3x3 radius around it, which it shoots pretty fast and deals decent damage. But the horrific range is definitely a big problem with it. On the other hand, another fusion that I used in this level was the Golden Yukon, the one I mentioned at the beginning of the video, which is the combo between the Sunflower and Potato Mine, and it explodes, giving you more sun. The last new fusion I used in this level was a Sunflower Seed way up front. I'm not gonna lie, I'm not too sure what it does because this is actually the only time I ever use it, and it kind of just sat there doing nothing. But I'm assuming either when it takes damage or it gets destroyed, it produces you more sun. Very similarly to the one in PvZ Fusion. Level 23, the first new fusion I used was a Solar Pea, which is technically not a new fusion as we used it in the beta. The second and third new fusions were the upgrades of the Spikeweed, one which deals damage in its own lane and adjacent lanes, and then there's of course the other one which deals damage in all 5 lanes. And in theory it sounds pretty good, but I'm not gonna lie, in action it's not really that good. And the last new plant slash fusion I used was the Lemon and the Greminade, and that lineage of plants basically explodes like a potato mine, but instead of dealing direct damage, it deals poison damage over time. The tier 1 of course explodes in its own tile, dealing damage to the zombie in that tile. The tier 2 explodes in a 3x3 radius, and then the tier 5 explodes in a 5x5 radius. And I've heard that the tier 5, which is the Explo OJ, is actually pretty good, but I don't end up using it enough to find out. Level 24, I only used 1 new fusion, which was the Electric Pea Shooter, so not really new at all, but I thought I'd still mention it. And I should probably also mention what the Sun Tower does because it's probably my favorite tier 3 fusion. And compared to the Twin Sunflower, it basically does 2 new things. 1, of course, it produces more sun, but 2, the better thing is that in a 3x3 radius around it, it actually collects sun on its own. So you actually don't have to worry about tapping on the sun by yourself, which in this game is an ability that's extremely helpful because you're always so focused on just placing your plants down and fusing them. So if you're wondering what my favorite plant in the entire game is, it's the Sun Tower. But moving on, level 25, I used another new fusion, which was the Nippy Cabbage, and this is just a bong choy that slows zombies down. And to get it, you just combine bok choy with iceberg lettuce. And this guy, though it was okay in this level, it actually becomes very handy in the volcano levels, and you'll see what I mean when we get there. But for now, moving on to level 26 is the first time I used Chuck Nut, which is the combination of a cabbage pole and the potato mine, which you might have seen there. After dealing damage, it landed down a tiny walnut or chestnut looking plant, and that thing's pretty cool because it kind of just stalls zombies for you. But I'm not gonna lie, though the stalling is good, the damage on the Chuck Nut is pretty horrific, which makes it so that I don't really end up using it ever after this level. Level 27, I make use of some of the Tangle Kelp fusions, and these again are nothing new because I used them a lot in the beta. But if you aren't familiar, it's basically just an upgraded Tangle Kelp with a 3x3 range, dealing more damage, and if it's on land, it can stun zombies for longer. But I'm not gonna lie, I remember it being really good in the beta, but now it kind of sucks. And I think this is mainly due to the reason that the zombies in this level were made much stronger. So in a way, it kind of just nerfed the Tango Kelp. I even fused all the way up to a Mango Kelp in this level, which has a pretty cool color scheme of green and red, and it just seems extremely angry, but it was still kind of meh. And my Bonk Choys and Lightning Reeds were kind of carrying, which you probably noticed I'm not really mentioning how difficult the levels are at this point, because to be honest, I was kind of over leveled after spending all that money, but I promise the game does start getting a lot more difficult pretty soon. But for now, let's skip to level 29 where we use another new fusion, which was the Beat Choi. And this guy is just a combination of two Bonk Choys, and it basically does the same exact thing, just dealing more damage. So the Beat Choi comboed with the peanut was pretty strong, and the Bonk Choys comboed with a different type of walnut was kind of the main strategy I was using a lot of the points. And in this setup, I'd even add a Speargrass behind the Bonk Choi, because if you remember, at a 3 tile distance, it deals its max damage, which kind of forces it to deal its max damage at the distance it's planted right now. So this was definitely a pretty cool strategy to use. And then I would just spam some Punk Shockers in the back, which basically cleared out the rest of the level. And I kind of just constantly kept spamming the same exact strategy because it was working so well, even semi doing the same thing on level 37. But I stopped here because I actually used a new fusion on this level, which was the combination of two tall nuts that combine into a bigger Juggernaut. And if you look at the Juggernaut, you'll see that it can actually tank a pretty hefty amount of hits from the Gargantuar. So it definitely lives up to its name. But I'm not gonna lie, that's literally the only time that I use it in this entire game, because combining 4 walnuts into 2 tall nuts and then into 1 Juggernaut is way too much effort to get in every single lane. And most of the time you're better off just using smaller tanks like the Lychee or even just a tall nut. The next stop we make is level 38, where I first used the Pine Needler, and I'm not gonna lie, I kind of remembered the Pine Needler being decent from the beta, but when I used it on this level I realized that it was kind of horrific. So I ended up losing Mo the lawnmower on this level, and then somehow with this one final Gargantuar left in the entire level, ended up just completely losing for the first time. My second attempt, I decided not to use the Pine Needler, instead focusing on just pea shooter fusions, but this went even more horrifically as I lost Mo way early on. And then even after getting down a bunch of Gatling peas, it was quickly becoming visible that they were not going to be enough, and eventually I ended up losing for the second time. So on the third attempt, I decided to just not even bring in the pea shooter, instead focusing on our normal setup of the walls, Bonk Choi, and the Lightning Reed, even throwing in some Iceberg Lettuce fusions for some freeze effects. And this worked much better than the original strategy that I was using on the level. And if we skip to level 40, you'll see me use the Explode OJ for the first and last time, and it was against the imp that the Gargantuar threw out. But of course it also hit the Gargantuar since it had the 5x5 radius. So honestly, I kind of have no idea how much damage it actually dealt here. And the rest of the level was just beaten using Punk Shockers. And at this point, I decided it was time to actually look at the other 2 game modes in the game, because of course there's the story mode that we've been playing, but there's 2 other things that you can play which are better for rewards. And the first one of the 2 is Lawn Patrol, which you can either put on easy, medium, and hard mode. And this is a game mode that changes every 2 weeks into a different thing, so you want to make sure that you're collecting all of the rewards and defeating all the levels within it before it resets, as it's actually one of the only 2 ways to get the bigger meteorite shards for later evolutions. And I wasn't really paying attention here as to what the Lawn Patrol was, so I sort of just brought in my normal setup, but this completely backfired on me when a balloon zombie came in. And the thing about the balloon zombies in this game is that only the cabbage pults can deal with them, and I'm talking about the basic 3 cabbage pole fusions. So even the Chuck Nut, which technically is a cabbage pole fusion, can't hit it for some reason. And here I was kind of just screwed because there was no way I could actually hit the balloon zombie, so I did kind of just have to quit battle. But on the next attempt, I of course brought in the cabbage pole, getting a ton of them to tier 4 because the balloon zombies were kind of tanky, and it was very helpful for us that we had tall nuts blocking them, because otherwise we might have lost. And it was only level 1, but either way I eventually beat levels 1 through 4 pretty easily on hard mode, though level 5 showed me how fast the difficulty was increasing, because I stood no chance against it, as the first balloon zombie easily made it to the mower, and then I was so focused on the balloon zombies that a regular zombie in the very middle lane ended up making it to the end. Oh, and at this point my cabbage pole was level 8, which looking back actually didn't really mean much, because for some reason the leveling in this system is exponential, so the higher level you get, the more the stats go up, which definitely makes things awkward in the way later levels. And if you look up top, you'll see that this level is named Campground Expedition, and it's actually the first level of the Campground Expedition. And the expeditions, to simply explain, are just harder versions of normal levels, and you'll see directly the difficulty of the expeditions later on. But let's just say these levels were the exact reason the title of this video is attempting to 100% the game instead of just 100%ing the game. But that aside, at first I actually made it pretty far. In beating level 7, you'll see that I unlocked these 3 big shards in the middle, and these guys are probably the most annoying resource that you have to collect in this game for leveling up your plants. plants. And when the time comes, I'll explain that as well. Because for now, we made it to level 8, where we ended up seeing more balloons, and my cabbage bolts just weren't enough, and they ended up making it to the end once again. And it was starting to seem like the balloon zombies were my kryptonite. And if you've been keeping up with Plants vs. Zombies 3 Evolved news, you might have been hearing that the cabbage pole was unironically the best plant in the game, and that was specifically due to the balloon zombies in the campground levels. Because since there isn't any other plant that can damage the balloon zombie, you have to just over level your cabbage pole to deal with them. And you're given such minimal resources, you can kind of only over level one plant, and it just has to be the cabbage pole, because otherwise you're not really making it far at all. Which is actually my exact and kind of only big complaint with the game, and it's the leveling system is kind of horrific. It's just way too difficult to level up your plants or even unlock them if you're free to play. But there is actually some good news that comes alongside my complaint, and that's that there's supposed to be a new update in the next few days that completely changes the leveling and the seed packet system. So I just have my fingers crossed that they do actually make a good change to it, because even though you've been seeing me use all the new plants within the previous levels, you're going to notice from now on, or more specifically from level 40 on, it kind of just becomes unreliable to use any of my other plants that aren't over leveled, because even the tier 3 plants that are tier 3 end up not working because they aren't leveled up enough. But quickly, before I explain that a little more, I actually ended up using the puff shroom on this level, and it's basically just a better pea shooter in this game. But if you combo it with the Greminade, it actually has a pretty cool fusion named the Dangerine, and this thing, like the Greminade, poisons and deals a pretty insane amount of damage to zombies. But the only thing bad about all of the sun shroom plants in this game is that they die out in the light. So if you look at that Dangerine in the top lane, you're about to see that it kind of just disappears into thin air. And if you look in the bottom left, you'll see the same exact thing happens to the Mega Sun Shroom as well. Oh, and if you're wondering what that Mega Sun Shroom does, it basically is the same thing as the Sun Tower, producing sun and collecting it automatically in a 3x3 radius around it. But on top of that, it randomly spawns you more Sun Shrooms around it, which is pretty cool, but it's kind of useless in these early levels, but you will see me using it in the night levels. But going back to the topic of the tier 3 plants being completely useless in this game, what I mean by that is that you're better off just focusing on leveling up your zap tails and cabbage bolts instead of leveling up your tier 2 or tier 3 plants, because one, the zap tails slash cabbage bolts or even the bok choys are just cheaper to level up, and like I mentioned, the leveling system, for some reason the stats are just exponential as you level up, so your tier 1 plants end up being like 20 times more stronger than your tier 3 plants, and it's for like 5 times less resources. But of course, like I already mentioned, PopCap did say that they're fixing this in the next update, which is supposed to come out in a few days, so let's hope they have a good solution for it. And for now, I'm just going to focus back on the levels, where as you can see, I was kind of just spamming my zap tails. But level 46 actually had a pretty cool feature added, and it was the water tiles on the lawn. And these water tiles, if you planted your plants on top of them, just made them faster. So like the zap tail is attacking faster, but if you placed a sunflower on top of them, it would produce sun faster. Oh, and you might be noticing that I'm bringing in my sun shroom alongside my sunflower, even though I mentioned that they vanish in the daytime. But my reasoning for this is that in the early game, it actually makes your sun production much faster. And if you time your fusions of the sun shrooms correctly, it resets the decay that they have. And even if they do end up decaying, the sun shroom is pretty cheap, so it ends up being worth it anyways. And I'm not gonna lie, I don't know the exact statistics of how much better bringing the sun shroom along is, but it definitely is faster than just the sunflower. Oh, and I forgot to throw this in there, but even though I was kind of just saying that all the tier 3s were useless, the only 2 tier 3s that I'd say are actually worth it are the sun tower and the mega sun shroom, but mostly just the sun tower since it doesn't decay and because of that 3x3 sun collecting radius. Oh, and actually the tier 3 of the iceberg lettuce is pretty decent as well. It's kind of difficult to get to because iceberg lettuce has a long recharge, but if you can get it and it hits the right zombies, it can freeze them for 20 plus seconds, which is pretty insane. And what makes these tier 3s actually good, even though I'm not able to level them up an insane amount, is because they have abilities that don't really matter with leveling up. The sun tower has a self-collecting, which is basically the same as level 1, and the iceberg lettuce one has that insane freeze effect even at level 1. But I'm not gonna lie, I kind of just yapped there and I have no idea where I was going with that conversation. So more importantly, if you look up top, you'll see that we're level 50 and I'm kind of completely covering the entire map in zap tails, which might seem like overkill, but there was a reason for it, and this was actually the first level that we see the escargot again. So I knew it was better to just spam all of the zap tails possible to completely overwhelm him. And I'm not gonna lie, using this strategy, the boss fight ended up not being a boss fight at all, as the escargot died in literally like 30 seconds. But a win is a win. And for the next several levels. We didn't really have a change of scenery at any point, so we kind of just ended up spamming the same exact strategy over and over again. There were definitely newer zombies being introduced in a lot of the levels that I hadn't mentioned yet, like the miner zombie, or even this pigeon feeder zombie towards the front who carries bread, calling in a bunch of pigeons. And at first the pigeons look threatening because you can't really hit them, but as soon as they reach one of your plants, they drop down to go and eat it and then instantly get eviscerated. And for the miner zombie that you can see digging towards the back in that very bottom lane, the only real option you have to go against them is one of the bok choys. And for now, as my bok choy or bonk choy wasn't over leveled yet, my best option was still the beet choy, but that does change a little later on when I start leveling up my bonk choy and bok choy, eventually making the beet choy useless. And like I mentioned earlier, the bonk choy lineage is especially important in the volcano levels, which start on level 61, but that's something that I actually figure out a little later on because I'd forgotten that the ice plants deal extra damage in these worlds. And for now, it wasn't too big of a deal as my normal plants dealt enough damage. And we actually hadn't gotten to the difficult part of the volcano yet, and we'd have these pre-placed mountains of cheese on the map that end up being extremely easy to take out, but things do get much more difficult starting level 66 because the Saganaki blasts are introduced. And these, if you look at the map right now, you'll see they drop down, basically placing a cheese mountain whenever they fall. And if they happen to land on any of your plants or even the zombies, they instantly destroy them, making them extremely threatening, especially if they take out your sun producers. But of course, there is a counter to these, and you'll see me placing them right in front of the nippy cabbage, and it's the entire umbrella leaf lineage. And most of the time, you'll just see me using the tier 1 umbrella leaf or the tier 2 jumbrella leaf because they are usually more than enough to deal with the falling Saganaki blasts. And I mentioned that because the normal umbrella leaf fades away after blocking a few of the blasts, and the jumbrella leaf can block much more, while the tier 3 version of it can block 20 Saganaki blasts in total in a 3x3 radius, which most of the time is way overkill. But if possible, it usually is a good idea to get it because it does have a lot more health. And at level 67, we use a new plant fusion that we hadn't used before, and it's the one if you look up front, which seems very similar to the nippy cabbage that we've already used, but it's actually the evolution of it named the numbing cabbage. And it's basically a combination of the umbrella leaf with the ice bonk choy. And if you're able to get it, it can be pretty good, but the levels are usually so chaotic that it's very difficult to obtain one in every single lane. So I usually just end up going with the lesser versions of it. And level 69 is definitely a pretty good showcase of what can happen if you don't have your umbrella leaves placed in the right places, because about halfway through, the back half of the map was completely just filled with cheese. And when you get to this point, it becomes extremely difficult to break down the cheese, all the while defending the zombies that are coming onto the lawn. And because of this, I actually ended up losing a lawnmower in the bottom middle lane, and eventually ended up losing in that same lane as well. Things also didn't get any easier in the next attempt because the same type of thing happened. We're trying to deal with the threat of the Saganaki blast. I kept on getting overwhelmed by the zombies, eventually losing to a basic zombie. So for now, I gave up on that level and instead went back to the lawn patrol, which also didn't go very well either because the balloon zombies there overwhelmed me. So I did another 180 and went back to the adventure. This time, instead of relying on the bonk choys, instead trying to just spam my zap tails, which also wasn't working, so I ended up just giving up on the level. And if you remember, I've only spent $310 so far, while the title says $350, and this was when I spent another $30 to obtain 7,000 more gems, buying more ultimate wild seed packs, which might seem useless, and they actually did end up being kind of useless, but at the time they seemed worth it because you could spend 50 of them to get 600 of the meteorite dust, and then you can convert 1400 of the dust into the big shards. And of course the big shards are needed to upgrade your plants, but I felt like I kind of got scammed here because the deal went away after I bought it once, and this was when I kind of realized that buying those ultimate wild seed packs was definitely a mistake. Oh, and I'm pretty sure they kind of took out these meteorite deals, but if they do ever come back into the shop, do not buy them because they aren't worth it at all for how much you actually have to spend to get them. But either way, at this point in the game, I was a little lost on how to even progress in the game since nothing was really working and I couldn't even upgrade my plants properly, and I did just waste 6,000 gems on basically nothing. But I did have about 900 more left over, so I decided to spend them on coins and experience, upgrading my cab barrage, which is the tier 3 cabbage pult, to level 4, and going back into level 5 of the lawn patrol and losing again, which at this point I was even more lost. But there was one more thing I could do before completely giving up, and that was changing the difficulty of the lawn patrol because I'd already been just playing on hard, so I decided to turn it down to medium, which would allow me to farm some more of the meteorite shards and maybe even let me progress further. And changing it to medium was a huge difference from hard because the zombies didn't really even stand a chance, and I was actually able to defeat up to level 15 of the lawn patrol on medium. And I stopped here on level 15 specifically because after defeating it, we had enough meteorite shards rewards to evolve my cabbage pole one more time. And leveling it up, it took its damage from 143 to 514 before I would have to evolve it again. Meaning I leveled it up from level 9 to level 14 and it had gotten 3 times stronger. And that was kind of what I meant by exponential curve. Even the health of the cabbage pole was at 4,000, making it nearly as tanky as a level 1 wall plant. And so after leveling it up, I put the difficulty back onto hard because we still had more rewards to collect from the previous levels that I couldn't defeat, eventually farming up to level 10 and deciding it was time to switch game modes after defeating it because I'd been playing Lawn Patrol for way too long. And my next target of levels was the Campground Expedition, which I was able to defeat up until level 14. Afterwards, finally making it back to level 69 of the adventure, which this time completely spamming my cabbage poles and a lot of zap tails felt like a cakewalk and kind of weird for even feeling difficult in the first place. 70 was also fairly easy, and I want to stop at level 77 because this was when I started incorporating the nippy cabbage into my arsenal, mainly due to the reason that we had the volcano variant of the miner in this level. And like I mentioned earlier, the ice plants do more damage to him, so they're just a slightly better option to have than Bong Choi at this point. There was also just a mix of the normal miner zombies, and those guys can be a little scary as they don't take extra damage from the ice plant, but they weren't too big of a deal either, as we can just place a zap tail or a cabbage pole in the very back where they pop up to tank the damage. And eventually I made it to level 80, which was for now going to be the last level of the volcano world. And again, it wasn't anything too difficult, meaning I'd finally escaped the volcano, making it back onto the normal lawn. And there's really no point on spending time on levels 80 through 100 because they kind of just end up being the same exact thing over and over again, and my strategy doesn't really change at all. And I eventually make it to level 100, which at the point of me playing the game was actually the last level of the adventure, and it was also the reappearance of the escargot, so I had all of my defenses lined up pretty well. And just like our last encounter with it, it didn't last very long, and we'd beaten the level very easily, which like I mentioned at this point was the last level in the game. So now it was time to take on the volcano expedition, which was unlocked after beating the volcano levels in the normal adventure. And again, this is basically the volcano levels but a little bit more difficult. Also, I know I mentioned it earlier, but you're gonna see that the expedition levels are the reason why I have the attempting in the title, because a bunch of the early levels I'm able to breeze past. For now, even beating the volcano expedition up to level 10. Oh, and before I get too far in, I also spent another $10 for some more gems because I needed coins to level up my cabbage pole to level 19. And if you notice the damage, it went from 500 to over 1,000, meaning from levels 14 to 19 it had doubled. Even the health, if you look at it, had doubled from about 4,000 to 8,000, which at this point in the game basically made every other plant useless, and it only made sense for me to use cabbage pole, unless of course I leveled up some of the other plants to a similar level. But for now, I went back into the campground expedition, just spamming the cabbage bolts, even taking on the lawn patrols, getting up to level 15 on the hard difficulty. And the only way you could actually beat level 20 on the lawn patrol was by getting your cabbage pole to max level, which for me at this point was basically impossible unless I waited like 2 months. And over those 2 months, grinded the different lawn patrols that appeared and even some other expeditions that happened to appear. And they'd be all for the bigger meteorite shards to evolve my cabbage pole. And honestly, I feel like most of this video was just me complaining, and there is good reason because I spent a lot of time and money trying to 100% the game, but it ended up just not being possible for me. So I was a little frustrated with the leveling system at the time, and I'm really hoping, like I've already mentioned, that they fix it with this new update that's coming up. Oh, and I haven't really mentioned this in the video, but I do feel like the beta was a little bit better than the early release. I mean, it was very easy, but it definitely felt more balanced than this game is right now. But okay, I'm gonna stop complaining because we still do have more levels to defeat. And the levels in question were the 50 levels added after about a month of the game being released, which first start off with this cutscene where we actually see Dave awake. And you might have noticed that I skipped a bunch of cutscenes in the game, and that was kind of because I wasn't really paying attention to him while playing the game either. But the important thing was how Dave woke up, and basically he kind of just woke up out of nowhere and said that he was taking a nap, which the nap happened to be 8 days long. And this cutscene specifically was just Dave talking about his dreams and Patrice saying that she needed to collect samples for her science fair project from camp near a lake. So that's exactly where we made our way over to. And again, the first 13 levels that I played were basically the same thing that we'd already experienced. So I'd actually moved on to the new expedition that also came out, and it was the sewer expedition. And the special thing about this area is that you're going to notice darker tiles on this lawn, and those darker tiles exist for the mushroom plants, because if they're on those dark tiles, the mushroom plants won't decay or fade away, making them a pretty powerful asset in these levels as they're usually cheaper and stronger, and utilizing them here can be very beneficial. But if you take a look at my attacking plants, you'll notice that my strategy basically stayed the exact same. There wasn't really any reason to change it at all, all, especially because I'd already leveled up my Cabbage Pole, Zaptail, and Bok Choy. I mean, I tried different things like using the Puff Shroom since it was a sewer level, which did work on the earlier ones, but when we got later on into the expedition, it was basically impossible to use the Puff Shroom as it was too low level. And level 12 specifically caught me very off guard because it had the dancer zombies for the first time, and I was only using the Cabbage Pulse as my main attackers with the Bok Choy in the very back for the miner zombie. And if you're unfamiliar, the Cabbage Pole is notoriously bad with dealing of big hordes of zombies because of its slow attacking speed. So this actually ended up in a loss for me. But on my second attempt, I did bring in the Zaptail, which I knew would do better than the Cabbage Pole in this level, and it actually ended up being much better because the zombies didn't really even stand a chance here. The problem last time was that the Cabbage Pole couldn't defeat the zombies fast enough, so the dancing zombies kept on multiplying over and over again. But this time, since the dancing zombies were taken out almost immediately, they didn't have a chance to spawn in any more zombies. So we pretty easily ended up beating the level, which after I moved back into the adventure into level 114, and from level 114 to level 120, it was pretty simple as I spammed Zaptails with Cabbage Pulse and a couple of Sun Towers in the back, pretty easily handling the zombies. But as we entered level 121, I saw that we're actually going to be in a different world, which we kind of got spoiled by the expedition, but it was the sewers again. And at first there was no sunlight, so you could plant any of the mushrooms anywhere we wanted, which was definitely helpful. But as you can see, the strategy still didn't change much, and the same logic kind of applied as we went through the levels. The only slight difference I made was not really using my sunflowers, as the mushrooms were good enough, and since they cost half as much and recharge way faster, they were kind of just a better option for these sewer levels. Also, I would have loved to use a tangerine plant at this point as it was meant for these levels, but since I didn't have enough meteorite shards to evolve it, it was kind of just stuck at level 4. And the best strategy for the sewers was just my Zaptails, Cabbage Pulse, and the occasional Bok Choy / Bonk Choy for the miner zombie. We do transition out of the sewers onto the volcano on level 141, but again, I basically had everything figured out at this point, and the important plants that I needed to beat these specific levels were high enough leveled that I eventually made it past all the volcano levels, beating level 149, which meant that we had one more level left, which was level 150, and it had a different type of boss that wasn't the escargot this time. And as Zomboss and Patrice were rage baiting each other, we found out that the boss's name was Buzzbox, and the lore behind him is that basically a beekeeper came up to Zomboss asking for an opportunity, which Zomboss then gave him a task, but he failed at that task. So then Zomboss proceeded to combine the beekeeper with a TV, of course with the power of the meteorite, which in return created the abomination of the Buzzbox. And this level specifically was probably my favorite level of the entire game. One, I was thankful that they added a different boss that wasn't the escargot, and two, the boss was actually seeming a little difficult because even with all of my Cabbage Poles constantly dealing damage to it, it slowly kept on creeping more and more up the lawn. But I'm not gonna lie, the iceberg lettuce was kind of overpowered in this fight as I constantly kept on freezing him when things got too dangerous. So with the help of the stall, we did end up beating Buzzbox, sort of leaving me on a high note for the game. And I feel like this is probably one of the more negatively framed videos that I've made, but that doesn't mean the game's gonna stay bad forever, because I still do feel like it has a ton of potential, and if the devs just kind of take it in the right direction, it might be a pretty decent game. And all we can really do is just believe. Oh, and also this is kind of abrupt, but this was basically as much of the game I could beat because the expeditions basically have become impossible since I couldn't level up my plants anymore, since the rate the meteorite shards were being provided was way too low. So I do hope that the update fixes this and I can fully 100% it when that happens. And one last thing I want to say before ending off the video is do not spend this much money on this game or any other game. Okay, that's enough yapping from me, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.